Hello and welcome to Setting the Standard on YouTube. My name is Ian Barnard. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about stereo microscopes, how they work, and I'm going to run you through the most important things that you need to know when deciding which one to get to help you in your jewelry making, stone setting, or engraving. We're also going to talk about some industry standard scopes, what I recommend, and at the very end of the video I'm going to go over a couple of my tips on picking up some good deals on some used scopes. So this is a bit of a long-winded video. I've gone ahead and put chapters just down below here. So if there's one thing you're specifically looking to get out of this, feel free to head down there and grab it. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about what makes a stereo microscope stereo. So it has two focal paths that run right from your eyes out the bottom of the microscope. This differs it from something like a binocular microscope, which just has the one focal path, or a USB microscope, which again just has the one focal path. And the reason we want the two complete paths is it gives us depth perception. And that's something that when you're working underneath it is absolutely critical. You cannot work without depth perception in our industry and do what we do. And this is also the main reason that it rules out the USB microscopes that sometimes people ask about when they're getting into it. I know they're cheap and attractive and it sounds great to work off a television screen, but unfortunately it's not going to work. So let's break down the stereo microscope. What is it made of? The main part of the stereo microscope is called the zoom head. Now that is the body of the scope, and inside there is your zoom. It has all of the built-in, all the magnification is inside of here. These come with a set zoom range. So something like this microscope has 0.7 to 5.5 times zoom. Now you add to that the eyepieces, which in our industry, in our case, what we're going to be using is 10 times eyepieces you're looking for. So you add the 10 times eyepieces to the 0.7 to 5.5, and what you end up with is 7 to 55 times zoom for this scope. Another thing to note with the eyepieces is what you'll have here is something called diopter adjustment. So when you first sit down at your microscope, you're going to need to do something called parfocal your eyes to the microscope. These microscopes are made to stay in focus throughout the zoom range from top to bottom. And the way that you do that is by adjusting these to each individual eye, which can also change depending on how tired you are. So the recommendation is actually to be doing this every single day. I don't know a lot of people who do this, but it's a good habit to get into, to do it every once in a while, and it'll prevent eye strain, and it'll make your life a lot easier. How to do it? You can look it up. I might try to put out a video on this, but until then, you can look it up in the literature for your microscope, or just have a Google of it, or have a look on YouTube. I'm sure somebody's made a video out there. So on the zoom head, you've got your zoom knob. This zooms in and out, pretty simple. So next up, off the bottom of your microscope, you're going to need a ring light. This is a ring of LEDs. There is some older options you might come across if you're buying used, especially like a fluorescent tube or a fiber optic. Wouldn't really recommend either of these. A lot of them are quite cumbersome. They're not as bright as we would like, and you can pick up a cheaper LED ring light off of Amazon for quite affordable. I mean, we're talking in the 60 to 80 quid range, and they will work okay. So I bought this Leica as a kit, and it came with the Leica ring light, which is ridiculously expensive. Like everything Leica, I can't honestly say that I notice a huge difference to the AM scopes that I've used in the light. But you know, I'd like to think it's better. Costs a lot more, but there's nothing wrong with the Amscope ones. Long story long. So next up, off of the bottom of the microscope, you're going to have a lens. Now in this case, I really enjoy working with all of the zoom of my microscope. So what I have here is a really, really dirty protective glass cover. Now this is effectively what could be considered a 1.0 times objective lens. So what you'll hear these called, and you might hear these terms, would be an objective lens, a Barlow lens, or an auxiliary lens. Now what those do is they change the effective magnification from your microscope to give you more working distance. You can get less working distance, but that is not, again, something that applies for us. Nobody wants less working distance. So depending on your exact make and model of microscope, you're going to have a set amount of working distance out of the box. So that is the distance from the bottom of the microscope to the work that's in focus. Now, again, depending on your make and model, most of these about 7 to 45 times microscopes like the Leica, Meiji, or Zeiss's, they're going to have between 100 and 120 millimeters out of the box. So that's about 4 to 5 inches, which is not that much room. So what you can do is you can get a lens to put on here, and it'll say something on the side like 0.5 times. And what that does is it will half the magnification of the microscope, and it will almost double your working distance. It will actually also give you additional depth of field, which is how much is in focus at once, which is also an added bonus. But it is a balancing act too, because if you're looking at something like the Leica A60, which only has 30 times magnification out of the box, obviously you start adding like a 0.5 onto that, and you're only going to be left with about 15 times zoom, which, depending on your purposes, what you're going to be using it for, you may or may not find that to be enough. Me personally, I did not. I really like around 25, 30 times as sort of a minimum. In fact, on this microscope, I don't use any lens at all because I really like having that entire 55 times zoom, which is a bit ridiculous, but it's fun at the same time too. And the majority of my work is setting. So the only thing I'm really getting under here is just sort of my engraver and my micromotor. Now, if you were doing something like firearms engraving or larger knives, well, then you may want a little bit more room to work, and you probably do not need as much zoom. So you can go ahead and you can use a lens like that to extend that. The same can be said for somebody who's a beginner as well. I might go ahead and recommend, if you're just getting into it, to lean towards something like the 0.5 or 0.63. And the reasoning for that is it can be sometimes a little bit difficult to just get your bearings under the microscope. So having that, being able to see more at once, and having that extra room to work can definitely help you adjust. And then you can move up a lens if you choose to in the future. So we're moving off of the top of the microscope we'll talk about now. This is the trinocular port, and this allows you to attach a camera to record what you're seeing through the microscope, or live stream it to a television in your workshop or your storefront, or even online if you choose to do that. Now, there's a few things to note about this. The first one is going to be that they aren't perfect. So they have an even shallower depth of field than what you're seeing through your microscope. So especially at higher zoom levels, it can be a bit tricky trying to get your specific area that you're working on in focus. A lot of the different camera options can struggle with glare. So this is especially apparent if you're working with stones like diamonds. It can really make the image sort of muddy. It can be a little tricky. But that being said, I mean, most of you guys will have seen scope footage on Instagram or somewhere else by now, so you probably know what we're looking at. If you're wondering whether or not you need or want this, in my opinion, you should be looking at what you intend to do with the footage. If you're looking to teach, in my opinion, engraving and setting, it's absolutely, like, you need it. You need to be filming through the microscope. That's just my opinion. Because it's just good to show the students exactly where your focus is, exactly what you are doing, and then you don't have to look up at what your external camera is looking at to try to point something out on a television for your students. You are looking at it so you can show them that way. Now, if you're just looking to market and post something on social media, well, then it might not be the best choice. And the reason I say this is because it is an extremely expensive add-on to something like, if you were to go from something like an A60 to this Leica S9 or the Zeiss Stemi 508, and you're putting the camera on top, I mean, you're talking double or triple the price of the Leica A60. And that's a lot of money to spend if you're just getting this extremely macro image. Now, in my own personal experience, what I've found posting that macro video online is I get a ton of jewelers commenting and following me. As many of you have probably seen some of my videos. I have not had the most luck, even at times where I was specifically trying to aim my content towards getting customers. I haven't had the best of luck with this. Now, that's not to say you can't do it. People like Johnny Oro and Adrian Rose Jewelry, both of them have had some incredible success on platforms like Instagram using the microscope footage. But it's an expensive option. To me, I think you could be just as better off using something like a camera on the side. That's what this is, this mount here. If you get another camera on the side of your microscope, that slightly wider image can actually be a little more beneficial to customers, because I think when it's so zoomed in, they don't really grasp what's going on, the people who don't understand jewelry. So having those tools and seeing the hands and the fingertips and whatnot, I think that that just gives them a better idea of what's happening, and they don't need to see that absolutely microscopic detail. That's not gonna sell them on anything. But it's just my personal opinion, and that's how it is. As far as hooking the cameras up to the microscopes, it can be quite a convoluted process, and it really depends on the cameras you want to use, adapters. It's a whole thing. So I've got a little bit of info about that. If you guys would like to see a video about that, please let me know down in the comments, and I can try to put something together for you guys. Next up, you're looking at something called a focus rack, and that is this guy here. What you're looking for here is something to let you set your microscope inside of it, and you tighten it down, and that allows you to focus up and down. Now, it's important when you're getting these that this ring here is the right size for your microscope, or else it's going to be loose, it's not going to fit. So there's a few different sizes, a few different sort of industry standard sizes that you can get. I'll try to put together a PDF of the common sizes when I get time, but for now, you'll have to look it up yourself. Off the back, you're looking at something called an E-type spigot. Most of the stands you're going to encounter have the hole for the E-type spigot. If you have something else off the back of your focus rack, important to make sure that it's going to be able to mate up with whatever stand you have, but there's a good chance it should have both of those. As far as sort of pricing, quality, like again, this is a Leica unit, extremely expensive. Now that being said, I didn't have to go Leica. I got it as a kit. I could have gone with a off-brand for about a quarter of the price, and it would have probably worked pretty much as good. But same with the ring light, you know. I'd like to think you get what you pay for, but I've used off-brand ones and I've not really been unhappy before, so who am I to tell? So on the topic of stands, let's talk about those. You're going to need something to mount your microscope to your bench and move it up and down from. Now this is called a flex arm or articulated arm. This is a great option if you ask me. This is what I've had in my home studio for a few years now. I really like it. It allows a lot of sort of moving around. It's relatively small, and you can tuck your microscope far out of the way, and it's relatively nice looking. Downsides, well, it's really floppy. So if you're somebody that wants to really lean on your microscope, you'll see some with headrest. This is probably not the one for you. This is really just to swing it in. I really like the eye cups when I'm using this because it lets me set my head where it's supposed to go. And I've just really enjoyed it myself. Now, one thing to note is, especially with something like setting and microsetting, where you're zooming in quite far, it's borderline useless for videoing. The rattle, the vibration, it's just far too much. Possibly it may work for engraving when you're zoomed out a lot further. I can't speak to that. I've never tried it. But what I've done to get around that is I have an upper tier above my workbench that this part of the stand actually rests on, and then I clamp it down, and that is how I get it nice and rigid so that I can film without that vibration. Another upside to this one is the mounting system. It's a little out of frame right now, but basically it clamps down quite nicely. So you can mount it on the edge of a bench without drilling holes. In this case, I have drilled holes, and that makes it a little more seamless, but you possibly, depending on your bench arrangement configuration, you might be able to get away without drilling holes, which for some people could be a benefit. So next up, you have something called a boom stand, which I'm going to put up in a photo right here. Don't have one with me. So boom stand has two main configurations. You're going to have something that bolts directly to your bench. And you're also going to have something that has a large counterweight, essentially a large heavy plate base that is going to sit often directly in the center on the top of your bench. So it's something to really consider if that's the choice, because it takes up a lot of space and it's not the prettiest thing out there. The ones that mount directly to your bench, they're a great option for filming. You're going to have to drill holes in your bench, so depends on that, and they usually will go sort of on the side or maybe on the back in the center. So on the side it might be in the way, but it's up to you. Have a look at your options. Last but not least, we've got the GRS Acrobat style mount. They sort of have a balance in between, in that they have this sort of flexibility up, down, left, right that the flex arm has, but when you tighten it, it's quite rigid. It's good for filming. It's a bit of both worlds. If you ask me, the only downside that I'm aware of, and this is definitely a personal thing for me, I've not heard anybody else complain about this, is it's just quite big. And it sort of looms above you on the top of your bench. So for me, I really care about the aesthetics of my work area, how this microscope tucks out of the way if I want it to. So for me, it ruled it out, having this large arm sort of looming above me, but that's taking nothing away from the function of the stand. It's fantastic, and there's a lot of very, very happy people out there with it. So the last things to know about the GRS Acrobat stands is that they will need hard mounting to your bench. So you're going to need to drill some holes, and it does come in two models. There's the older sort of original model. It's a gray color, and it has a built-in focus rack that has an 84mm ring that's made for the Meiji EMZ series. And a lot of the imports, the Chinese models, the Amscopes, and the GT Visions and whatnot, they are typically 84mm. I can't confirm for everyone, but most of them are going to be 84mm. There is a second newer model that's a black color, and it's called the Versa. Now this one's been designed primarily for the A60 that they ship it with, but the A60 has a built-in focus rack with that E-type spigot on the back that we talked about. So if you're going with the A60, then obviously it's going to mate up just fine. If you want to go with another scope and you want to use that Acrobat stand, you will just need a focus rack with that E-type spigot on the back. So what type of stand should you choose? Well, it's really going to depend on the type of work that you're doing. Reasons to go with the flex arm over the other two would be if you want a lot of flexibility, you want to be able to move it left, right, up, down, you want to be able to tuck it out of the way quickly. So maybe you're somebody who only uses it part-time, you want it in and out quickly, you want it to tuck away, maybe you're going to have extended periods of time where you're not using it and you want it neat and tidy in the corner. That could be a great option. Not a great option if you're going to be filming. If you are going to be looking to film, then you'd be looking at probably the Boom or the Acrobat, or something like I have here, which is a, I've got a tier, an extra tier here, which I'll just give you guys a quick look. Just shows there, and then I clamp down using this guy. Who would the Boom stand be for? The Boom stand would be a great option if you do primarily setting or jewelry engraving, and you're using something like this, like a desk style setup, and you work only on the micro block. That would probably be a good option for you. I have seen people use it on more standard style of jewelry bench setups, but I think in that case, something like the flex arm or the Acrobat would probably be a better option for you. If you're doing something like hand engraving and you're going back and forth between smaller pieces and larger pieces like a firearm, you're definitely going to want something like the flex arm or the Acrobat. If you're filming, it's got to be the Acrobat. If you're not filming, then it's definitely going to be a preference between, do you like the ability to move it in and out with your head? Like, you really cannot rest your head on this. Whereas you'll see some people with the Acrobat actually have an attached headrest. So if you're looking for that firm rigidity, Acrobat. If you're looking for movement, go for this guy. All right, you guys. So now we've talked about the main parts and functions of stereo microscopes. Let's talk about some of the industry standards that you're going to see out there at your suppliers or on social media, or that some of your colleagues are using. Now, the first one is going to be, it's got to be the Meiji EMZ line. I'm going to show a picture up here. The Meiji EMZ has been around forever. It's definitely like a firm favorite of a lot of people. They last forever. They're absolutely bulletproof. I mean, if you find one of these things used, regardless of the condition, you can get them fixed. You can get them like they're great. They're great. You can't go wrong. The EMZ5 is the main one you're going to see. You can also see some of the higher up models, the 8, the 10 and the 13. The 10 and the 13 have some different zoom ranges that may or may not be of benefit. They've got a little bit more zoom, I believe. So I'd say you probably wanted to be looking at the 5 or the 8. The nice thing with the EMZ 8 TR is it's got the trinocular option, and you can sometimes find these used for pretty cheap. So if that's something that you'd like to do, but the Leica S9 or the Stemi 508 is out of your budget, then the Meiji EMZ 8 TR is definitely a great option for you. One definite thing to note with the trinoculars is Meiji also made an EMZ 5 TR trinocular version, and the 5 TR is of no use to us in this industry because it has a small lever on the side that takes light from one of the eyes and runs that to the camera port. So it's actually not going to be any good for you to use while you're working. It's more for photography rather than videography. Now, that being said, again, these have been around for so long and they're so good. So there's so many of them out there. You may find one of these 5 TRs used. Definitely don't shy away from it if you can get a good deal on it. Don't certainly pay a premium with the assumption that you're going to be able to use it for video, because it's just it's not going to happen. So with the Meiji EMZ line, the optics are absolutely fantastic. It is a slightly older microscope, so I would say something like the newer Leicas, well, especially the Leicas, but also the Zeisses, you're going to have a brighter image. As far as clarity, though, I mean, every microscope, all 3 of these main microscope lines are incredibly clear, so you're not going to be unhappy there. But yeah, especially at higher zoom levels on the Meiji line, you are going to notice some darkening, and that is going to be increased when you add a objective lens. With the EMZs, they are not specifically built for this industry. They are built for many industries. So there's a lot of different configurations you might find them with options that I haven't covered in this. Little ports and various little things, doohickeys coming off of it. As far as I'm aware, none of those get in the way of what we do. So if you find a good deal on something and it's got an extra feature that you've never heard of and doesn't seem to apply to you, it does not hinder the function of what you want it to do. So I think you can confidently buy pretty much any EMZ 5 and 8 specifically, and it will work for you. As long as you are aware that you're looking for the 10 times eyepieces and somewhere around a 0.5 or 0.75 objective lens. For a focus rack for the Meiji, there's lots of good options. You can get lots of cheap options. You're looking for 84mm for the ring. And for objective lenses, you can get Meiji versions. You can also get aftermarket ones. Probably safe to assume that the aftermarket ones are going to be a little bit darker. But optically, the ones I've tried that weren't Meiji branded, they were workable and a lot cheaper. So something to consider. If you do see something out there, you're looking for an M50 thread with a 0.75 thread pitch. As far as what magnification of objective or auxiliary lens you should be looking for, I ran a poll on some engravers groups and setting groups on Facebook, and it seemed that the 0.5 was pretty overwhelmingly favored by engravers, while for setters, again, the 0.5 was favored, but the 0.75 was commonly used as well. So again, take into consideration what you're going to be working on, what the size of it is, and do you focus on larger engraving or smaller sort of micro pave. So the Leica A60, chuck another photo up here, it's taken the industry by storm. I mean, what more can be said? They're an absolutely brilliant microscope. They look great. The optics are clear. They've got that new fusion optics from Leica, which is just incredibly bright. And it has that massive depth of field that I'm sure anybody who's read about them has probably heard about. I mean, what else is there to say? Unfortunately, you probably won't find these used very often because people love them so much. They are just, they're a great scope. Downsides, I mean, they've got a lower out of the box total zoom at 30 times rather than sort of the 45 of the Meiji or the 55 of the higher end Leica or Zeiss. But especially for somebody like an engraver, people seem really happy, and a lot of diamond setters seem really, really happy with them as well. One thing to note with that fusion optics that they talk about, it's achieved through something of an optical trick. So if you know anything about camera lenses, they have something called an aperture, which opens and closes. And when it's open, it lets more light in, but it gives you a shallower depth of field, which is how much is in focus. So what it actually does is one of your eyes is shown something with a larger depth of field, and one of your eyes is shown something with a clearer, darker image. And then in your brain combines the two. So it's a little bit of a sort of a head trip when you look through it at first, because you're just like, huh, that's weird, but it can just sort of take a bit of getting used to. So just something to be aware of. I have heard of people who didn't get along with them, but I mean, it's one or two people out of the hundreds or thousands, I mean, of setters that, and it's just one or two of an untold number of jewelers now that are very happy with these Leicas. So something to be aware of. The other downside you might have seen earlier in the video is these eye cups. You'll see people complain about them online. They are a bit silly. Now, that being said, I would say they fall off on me probably once a month. It's not the end of the world, and I really like them. Some people don't like eye cups on any microscope, so it's not the end of the world. You can glue or tape or get other off-brand ones. But just thought I'd bring it up because it's something to note. And the last thing to know about the Leica A60 is that it actually has this focus rack built onto the back of it. So you do not need an additional part, which is really nice. So it just has the E-type spigot coming right off the back. So that just mates into whatever stand you choose to get for it. So my polling for the Leica A60 for the objective lenses, the engravers definitely tended towards the 0.5. Setters seem to be most commonly around the 0.63 or 0.75. There was some setters using the 0.5, and there is also some setters, myself included, using no lens at all. And for some insane reason that is beyond me, Leica appears to have built this microscope to not work with objective lenses. So you actually need to get this little Leica adapter ring, and this, when you take your protective glass off, this screws in, and then you screw your objective onto that. For some reason, when you put the objective directly onto the microscope, the internal optics of the microscope will hit that lens and possibly damage the optics, the lens, or both. Now, why they did that, I don't know. So, yeah, just something to be aware of. So, Leica S9. Now we're talking. This is my favorite microscope, so I'll try not to be biased. This thing is amazing. 55 times zoom, fusion optics. Like, it's just absolutely brilliant. You will not be unhappy with this microscope. Downsides to this microscope, it's not the prettiest one. It's a pretty small gripe. I do wish it felt a little bit more expensive, and it just sort of feels cheap. It doesn't appear to be cheaply made. Like, the quality feels great. I've been super happy with it. I've had it a couple of years now, but it just kind of feels like the plastic body just could be nicer. When you're spending this sort of money, it'd be nice to feel like you spent that sort of money. But again, that's taking nothing away from the functionality. So this comes in 3 versions: the no camera, an integrated camera, and the version with the port on the top. The integrated camera is now 4 or 5 years old. It never had very good image when it came out. It obviously hasn't improved since, and it can't be changed out or upgraded in the future. So I would just rule that out entirely. You want the one, this is the S9D, which has the port for the camera, and then you can put on whatever camera you choose to put on. That's what I would go for. As far as polling of the engravers and setters for the objective lens choice, engravers overwhelmingly seemed to choose 0.5. Setters seemed very happy with the 0.5, or the 0.63 was also a common option. The Zeiss Semi 508 would probably be one of the more common other options. It would be maybe what you could consider the Zeiss version of this, sort of a higher end trinocular option for people looking to record through the microscope like this one does. As far as a comparison, it's a phenomenal microscope. It's definitely on par with this one. People seem to prefer either the Leica or the Zeiss without sort of being able to really put a finger on why they prefer one or the other. In my very limited experience with the Zeiss, I found the Leica to be brighter at higher zoom, but functionally, optically, it's it's the same. They're both absolutely incredible microscopes. Maybe the form factor is actually a little bit nicer on the Zeiss, but realistically, especially if you're going to be spending this much money, it's probably good you sit down and try each one and see which you lean towards, whether it's the Leica or the Zeiss. If you're in the market for something high-end that's going to be doing video and you're looking to go brand new. Polling for this microscope is pretty similar to the S9. People, again, seem to like the 0.5 or the 0.63. It's got similar amount of zoom. It goes at 55 times, same as the Leica S9. So you're still going to be left with lots of zoom if you put a lens on the bottom. So nothing to complain about there. So now that we've gone through the 3 sort of industry standard microscopes, as I would consider it these days, we're going to talk a little bit just about name brand microscopes that you may not have heard so much about, or there may not be as much literature about them. There is tons and tons of great models available out there that you can pick up used. Now, the brilliant thing about microscopes is they're not really it's not something like a computer, which is advancing so much year on year on year. You can get microscopes that are 30 years old that are absolutely brilliant pieces of kit and very much workable for the work that we're doing nowadays. Somebody on Sam Alfano's Engravers Cafe forum has actually put together an incredible list of these microscopes specifically, and you're able to go on there and you're able to have a look at down some of the old Nikons, Zeiss, Leicas, Wild. There's a whole slew of old microscopes that are going to be great options. And there's also a great list there that tells you microscopes to avoid as well. So I've been back and forth on there several times throughout my career. I'm going to link it down in I'm going to link it down in the description below. Make sure you go over and check that out if you're looking to pick up something used, because a used microscope can definitely be fantastic value. When you are looking at those used ones, a great option is something like eBay. You go on eBay, you type in stereo microscope, you set the condition to used, and it's going to come up with a lot of different options. Now, most of these are not going to apply to our industry, so have a look down and try to find something that is either one of the 3 ideally that we've talked about already, or something that hits high on that list over on Sam Alfano's forum. Piecing together the stand is a whole other thing, but you can get some great options from Amscope. Has some cheap, decent quality stands, and then same with the light, and then you're away to the races. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure to put together, and I hope you guys got some value out of it. Please let me know your thoughts, good or bad. I'd really love to hear from you guys. If you have any ideas for stuff you'd like to see in the future, any other videos, let me know in the comments. I'm going to try to keep putting some of these out for you guys. I've got some great resources for you over on my website as well. I've got a full set of the tools that I use for microsetting. That's all put together on my website. You can find my podcast, Setting the Standard, out now on all platforms, and all of my socials will also be down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. It's been a slice.